Venga por mí. Aquí lo espero en Miraflores. No se tarde en llegar, cobarde. Venga por mí, cobarde.
Maduro dared the U.S. to invade. Trump answered.
We have Venezuela acting up.
3 U.S. warships are tearing through the Caribbean, loaded with Marines, Tomahawks, and a message loud enough for the entire world. President Maduro's days are numbered. The question is, why now? And in this video, I believe I have the answer. The powder keg ignites. The facts are staggering. According to federal indictments, Maduro's regime turned Venezuela into a narco state, pumping up to 250 metric tons of cocaine into global markets every year, enough for 30 million lethal doses. The DOJ even accused him of deliberately using cocaine as a weapon against the United States. Let that sink in. A sitting head of state indicted for conspiring with Colombian guerrillas to flood American cities with drugs. Attorney General William Barr didn't mince words. He laid it out in black and white.
Maduro very deliberately deployed cocaine as a weapon.
That statement wasn't hyperbole. It was a criminal allegation backed by years of DEA investigations and sealed indictments. The implications, if true, the Venezuelan presidency wasn't just corrupt. It wasn't just authoritarian. It was functioning as an international cartel, one that weaponized narcotics to weaken the United States itself. And this is exactly why the Trump administration decided it was time to act. The optics were unmistakable. Venezuelans living abroad posted TikToks of U.S. destroyers moving into position, blasting YMCA as fighter jets streaked overhead, a bizarre but emotional display of silent euphoria from a diaspora that had been begging for international help. Inside Venezuela, the people couldn't speak out publicly because any expression of gratitude toward the U.S. could land them in prison or worse. Still, the mood was shifting. As one activist described it, a silent euphoria, the quiet hope that maybe, finally, after years of starvation, repression, and mass migration, the tide was turning. But to understand just how high the stakes are, you have to look at what Maduro himself has been saying. When reports leaked that Trump openly floated invasion plans with Colombia's former president Juan Manuel Santos, Maduro went ballistic.
Cuenta el ex alto funcionario que Donald Trump insistió en varias oportunidades y en una reunión privada con el presidente saliente de Colombia, Juan Manuel Santos, y con otros presidentes aliados de la derecha imperialista, a uno por uno lo increpó para que aceptara su idea de una intervención militar sobre Venezuela. Y esto lo traigo a colación porque en su momento lo rechazamos, lo denunciamos, lo repudiamos. Y como funcionarios militares y políticos presentes argumentaron en contra de una intervención militar en Venezuela.
He called Trump's ideas supremacist and criminal, pointing to the U.S. invasions of Grenada and Panama as scars on Latin America's memory. But here's where it gets even darker. In an interview from Moscow, Maduro claimed the U.S. wasn't just bluffing. It was already conspiring with Colombia to fill Venezuela with violence. He mocked Trump, saying he didn't even know where Venezuela was on the map, and doubled down that Caracas had Russia's backing, openly flaunting support from Vladimir Putin. And that's the nightmare scenario for Washington. Venezuela becoming not just a narco state, but a geopolitical outpost for America's biggest rivals. Chinese, Cuban, Iranian, and Russian flags have all been spotted flying over Venezuelan military outposts. Think about that. 4 of Washington's top adversaries planting their banners inside a country just a 4-hour flight from Miami. If Trump succeeds in removing Maduro, analysts argue it could be his greatest foreign policy success ever. If he fails, however, Venezuela becomes a fortress of narco-terrorism and foreign influence right in America's hemisphere, and this is why U.S. warships are in position. This isn't about oil alone. Though Venezuela has the largest proven reserves in the world, it's about drugs, it's about cartels, it's about Russia, China, and Iran using a failed state to destabilize the hemisphere. Trump himself laid it out bluntly.
We have Venezuela acting up in a different way. They continue to send people that we rebuff to our border. They continue to send drugs into our country.
But here's the bombshell you need to hear. U.S. prosecutors say Maduro wasn't just looking the other way while drugs left his country. He was personally meeting with Colombian guerrilla leaders to coordinate shipments. In 2008, he allegedly sat down with Diosdado Cabello and Hugo Carvajal to negotiate weapons and cash in exchange for increased cocaine production. By 2013, he was reportedly authorizing arrests of low-level Venezuelan soldiers to deflect scrutiny while his inner circle circle kept moving tons of product. That's not politics. That's organized crime at the level of a head of state. And now, viewers, here's where the cliffhanger comes in. Trump's destroyers are already in the Caribbean, Marines are on standby, and Washington has put a $15 million bounty on Maduro's head. The question isn't if the U.S. will act. The question is how. Will Trump order a direct military strike to remove Maduro, or will he tighten the economic noose and wait for Venezuela to collapse from within? Either way, the powder keg is lit and the world is watching. And yet, even as destroyers close in, Maduro isn't blinking. He's doubling down, framing himself as a revolutionary fighting off imperialist invaders. In a fiery interview from Moscow, he lashed out.
Venezuela wants only one thing: respect. The time of U.S. interference in the social and political life of Latin America and the Caribbean should be left behind.
To his supporters, that's Maduro drawing a red line. But to Washington, it's delusion, because behind the nationalist rhetoric is the cold reality. Venezuela is collapsing. By 2016, 3/4 of Venezuelans lost an average of 19 pounds because food was so scarce. Hospitals lacked basic medicine. Millions fled on foot across borders, creating the largest refugee crisis in the Western Hemisphere. And while the people starved, Maduro's inner circle gorged themselves on Miami condos, private jets, and high-end watches. U.S. prosecutors in Florida documented millions laundered through luxury apartments and yachts. One U.S. attorney warned, "This party is coming to an end." Here's what makes this even more combustible. Maduro's cartel isn't some ragtag operation. It's called the Cartel of the Suns, named after the golden stars worn by Venezuelan generals. According to indictments, his top military brass weren't defending their borders. They were negotiating drug deals, providing safe havens for cocaine labs, and authorizing codes for smuggling flights. This wasn't hidden corruption. This was systematic. In 2009 alone, Maduro allegedly met with Colombian FARC guerrillas to negotiate a 4-ton shipment of cocaine. And when French authorities seized 1.3 tons of cartel cocaine in 2013, Maduro reportedly orchestrated the arrest of low-ranking Venezuelan officers, scapegoats, to shield himself and his allies from scrutiny. Think about the message that sends. Not only was the president accused of running drugs like a cartel boss, he was allegedly weaponizing state institutions to protect the trade. The narco-state exposed. The destroyers in the Caribbean weren't just steel and missiles, they were a message to Nicolas Maduro that the game had changed. Washington wasn't just calling him a dictator anymore, they were officially labeling him a drug kingpin. And if history tells us anything, when the United States puts a price on your head, your days are numbered. Think about it. The last time America indicted a sitting foreign leader was Manuel Noriega in Panama, and we all know how that ended. U.S. troops stormed the capital, dragged him out, and locked him away for decades. The comparison wasn't lost on Maduro. In his own words, Trump's talk of invasion was proof of a supremacist and criminal vision from Washington, pointing to Panama and Grenada as examples of U.S. massacres in Latin America. But here's the twist. Unlike Noriega, Maduro isn't alone. He's not some isolated strongman with no friends. He has 4 powerful backers: Russia, China, Cuba, and Iran, all with boots, money, or spies on Venezuelan soil. That makes regime change in Caracas 1,000 times riskier. Let's break this down. Russia has already delivered weapons and stationed military advisors in Venezuela. China has sunk billions into infrastructure and oil deals, waving its flag over Venezuelan bases. Cuba's intelligence services are embedded deep inside the security apparatus, keeping Maduro insulated from coups. And Iran? They've been fueling Venezuela's collapsing energy sector with shipments of oil and military cooperation. This is why U.S. officials see Maduro not just as a dictator, but as a beachhead for America's top adversaries. As one analyst put it, Venezuela has become the most dangerous narco state in the Western Hemisphere, and the evidence keeps piling up. U.S. prosecutors allege that Maduro's regime worked hand-in-hand with Colombia's FARC guerrillas to flood America with cocaine. This wasn't an accident. According to indictments, Maduro himself sat in meetings with cartel bosses, promising safe haven and political protection in exchange for cash and weapons. The numbers are staggering. Between 200 and 250 metric tons of cocaine shipped out of Venezuela every year. That's enough for tens of millions of lethal doses hitting U.S. streets. And Maduro's generals weren't just complicit. They were allegedly running the operations, earning the cartel its infamous name, Cartel of the Suns. And here's where it gets even more shocking. Prosecutors didn't just say Maduro allowed cocaine to leave Venezuela. They accused him of deliberately using cocaine as a weapon against the United States to weaken America from within. Imagine that, a sitting head of state allegedly waging chemical warfare through narcotics. Meanwhile, inside Venezuela, the suffering deepened. Reports showed families digging through garbage for food. By 2016, 3/4 of Venezuelans lost an average average of 19 pounds due to shortages. Hospitals collapsed, power blackouts became routine, and millions fled the country on foot. And yet, Maduro's cronies flaunted their stolen wealth abroad. In Miami alone, prosecutors seized over $450 million in luxury condos, yachts, and private jets linked to regime officials. Venezuelans starving at home while their so-called leaders sipped champagne in Florida penthouses. This is why Venezuelan activists abroad describe the U.S. deployment as hope. In TikTok clips, you see them dancing, celebrating, and blasting music as American warships steam past Caribbean islands. Inside Venezuela, people can't show it publicly because one word of support could land them in prison. But privately, they call it silent euphoria. But don't think this is just a Latin American issue. U.S. officials have been blunt. Maduro's regime is a direct threat to the American homeland. Former U.S. Attorney Jeff Berman made it crystal clear. Maduro and the other defendants expressly intended to flood the United States with cocaine. That's not ideology. That's not socialism versus capitalism. That's narco-terrorism aimed at U.S. cities. The million-dollar question, or should we say the $15 million question, since that's the bounty on Maduro's head, is whether Trump was ready to go all the way. Because sending destroyers and Marines to the Caribbean is one thing. Actually ordering an invasion of a sovereign nation is another. And according to multiple reports, Trump seriously considered it. In private conversations, he pressed regional allies like Colombia's President Juan Manuel Santos to support a military intervention. He allegedly pitched it over and over, only to be told it was too dangerous, too destabilizing. But that didn't stop him from floating the idea again and again. Maduro, for his part, mocked Trump as ignorant, saying he doesn't even know where Venezuela is on the map. He framed himself as a defender of sovereignty, warning that Venezuela had Russian arms and would fight back if attacked. But even he knows that if U.S. troops land in Caracas, the fight is already over. So what's next? On one side, indictments, destroyers, Marines, and a $15 million bounty. On the other, Russian weapons, Chinese investments, Cuban intelligence, and Iranian fuel lifelines. The stage is set for a confrontation that could reshape Latin America forever. And here's the cliffhanger for this chapter. The biggest threat to Maduro may not be Trump's destroyers or U.S. Marines, but betrayal from within his own circle. Because while Maduro screams defiance from balconies, prosecutors say his own generals, judges, and ministers have already cut deals with the United States. Quiet defections, secret bank accounts, and whispers of a palace coup. For Trump, this was the opening. He could frame Maduro not as a socialist leader, but as a narco-terrorist threatening the United States directly. And in March 2020, the Department of Justice dropped the bomb, an indictment of Maduro for conspiracy to commit narco-terrorism. They put a $15 million bounty on his head, the same treatment once reserved for the likes of Pablo Escobar. That announcement wasn't just legal, it was psychological warfare, because it sent a message to Maduro's inner circle: defect or face a lifetime in a U.S. prison. And yet Maduro isn't without backers. Russia sent planes loaded with humanitarian aid while quietly propping up his military. China built infrastructure projects in exchange for oil, with their flag flying openly over Venezuelan military bases. Cuba embedded intelligence operatives to help Maduro crush dissent, and Iran shipped fuel to keep Caracas from grinding to a halt. This isn't just Venezuela versus the United States. It's a proxy battlefield for 4 rival powers. That's why Venezuelans abroad describe the U.S. destroyers as not just symbolic, but existential. As one opposition figure put it, Trump is probably the biggest ally Venezuelan freedom fighters have had in 25 years. So where does this leave us? On one side, a dictator accused of narco-terrorism, laundering hundreds of millions, and arming guerrillas, backed by Russia, China, Cuba, and Iran. On the other, the United States Navy, Marines, and a Justice Department bounty on his head. And stuck in the middle, millions of Venezuelans living under silent fear, waiting to see if the foreign power that promises to save them will finally act. Because here's the kicker: Trump didn't just want sanctions. Multiple sources confirmed that he personally pushed allied leaders, including Colombia's Juan Manuel Santos, to consider outright military invasion. Some said he was dead serious, others thought he was bluffing. But for Venezuelans, the possibility is no longer hypothetical. Destroyers are in the water, carriers are on standby, Marines are ready. The fuse has been lit, and in the next part of this expose, we'll pull back the curtain on the hidden deals, the foreign backers, and the double crosses inside Maduro's own circle that could decide whether he survives or ends up in a U.S. courtroom. The Department of Justice's indictment wasn't just paperwork, it was theater. When Attorney General William Barr appeared on camera to unveil the charges, the moment was unprecedented.
Today I'm here to talk about the former Maduro regime and its direct participation in narco-terrorism, corruption, money laundering, and drug trafficking.
he wasn't alone. U.S. attorneys from New York and Florida stood beside him, announcing charges against Maduro, his generals, and even Venezuela's Chief Justice. It was a coordinated legal strike designed to strip away any illusion that Maduro was a legitimate head of state, and the details were jaw-dropping. The DOJ accused Maduro of working hand-in-hand with dissident factions of Colombia's FARC guerrillas, giving them safe haven to traffic cocaine across Venezuela's borders. According to investigators, the regime built what they called an air bridge from the border state of Zulia, flying drugs out to Central America, a bridge that had grown fivefold in just 4 years.
The FARC gets this cocaine over into Venezuela and then is given safe haven by the regime to fly this cocaine from an area called Zulia near Lake Maracaibo up into Central America.
Let's not forget the scale. Prosecutors estimated 200 to 250 metric tons of cocaine shipped annually. That's the equivalent of 30 million lethal doses hitting U.S. streets every year. Barr described Maduro's strategy bluntly.
Maduro and the other defendants expressly intended to flood the United States with cocaine in order to undermine the health and well-being of our nation.
Meanwhile, the international press wanted answers. When PBS NewsHour's Ryan Chilcote sat down with Maduro in Moscow, he pressed him directly. Did he take Trump's military threats seriously? Maduro fired back with fury.
The president of the largest, the most powerful military power in the world has no right to joke or not be serious.
He insisted Venezuela had no weapons of mass destruction, portraying his country as modest and defenseless. But in the same breath, he bragged about Russian arms stockpiles propping up his military. This wasn't a man confident in peace. This was a man signaling that any U.S. intervention could ignite a proxy war involving Moscow. But the most dangerous part of this story is what the indictments revealed about Maduro's inner circle. The Chief Justice of Venezuela's Supreme Court, Miguel Moreno, was charged with international money laundering. Prosecutors accused him of taking bribes to dismiss criminal cases, greenlighting the seizure of multinational corporations, and funding his luxury lifestyle in Florida.
They're not decided based on evidence or what is right or what is wrong. Instead, decisions are based on whether or not you bribe the right person.
If the judiciary was compromised, and the military was compromised, and the executive was compromised, what was left of Venezuela's institutions? Nothing. Just a narco-state run by a cabal of men in uniforms with golden suns pinned to their shoulders. So the question becomes, how long can a regime like this survive when its own elites are defecting? Already, former generals like Cliver Alcala have broken ranks, exposing the inner workings of Maduro's drug connections. U.S. prosecutors hinted that more insiders were quietly cooperating, cutting deals in exchange for leniency. And that's where Trump's strategy comes full circle. Because while the destroyers in the Caribbean signal military might, the indictments are psychological warfare. They're designed to crack the loyalty of Maduro's lieutenants, to make every minister wonder if his colleague is already talking to the DEA. Which brings us to the cliffhanger. In the next part, we'll expose the betrayals from within, how Maduro's own generals smuggled cocaine while plotting against him, how judges sold verdicts for millions while secretly shopping in Miami, and how his so-called revolution could collapse, not from a U.S. invasion, but from knives in his own palace. Betrayal inside the palace. The most dangerous threat to Nicolas Maduro isn't coming from U.S. destroyers or Marines. It isn't even Donald Trump's fiery rhetoric. The real danger is much closer, inside his own circle. Because according to prosecutors and insiders, the cracks in Maduro's regime aren't small, they're gaping. His generals, judges, and ministers have been caught cutting deals, laundering millions, and whispering to U.S. investigators. Think about that for a moment. The same men tasked with protecting him are now facing indictments, bounties, and temptations to betray him. Take Cliver Alcala, a former general once considered one of Maduro's most loyal allies. U.S. prosecutors alleged that Alcala acted as a middleman between FARC guerrillas and Maduro's cartel. He wasn't just a soldier. He was allegedly arranging weapons deals, smuggling operations, and cash transfers across the Colombian border. But when the U.S. unsealed its indictments in 2020, Alcala flipped. He surrendered himself in Colombia, effectively abandoning Maduro and confirming the very drug links Caracas had denied for years. That defection sent shockwaves through Venezuela's military. If one general could cut a deal, who was next? And then there's Hugo Carvajal, Maduro's former intelligence chief. Known as El Pollo, Carvajal once controlled Venezuela's vast spy apparatus. But according to U.S. prosecutors, he also personally coordinated large cocaine shipments for the Cartel of the Suns. When he was briefly arrested in Aruba in 2014, Maduro's regime pressured the Dutch government to release him. That pressure campaign worked, but it also revealed how deeply invested Caracas was in protecting its narco generals. Years later, Carvajal resurfaced in Spain, fighting extradition to the United States. His case remains a ticking time bomb for Maduro. If Carvajal talks, he could expose everything. Even Diosdado Cabello, widely considered the second most powerful man in Venezuela, hasn't escaped allegations. U.S. officials have accused him of playing a central role in the cartel's drug trafficking empire. Together with Maduro and Carvajal, Cabello allegedly attended multiple meetings with FARC representatives to negotiate cocaine shipments. For years, Cabello was portrayed as untouchable, a political enforcer with a private militia at his disposal. But with the Justice Department offering $10 million rewards for his arrest, even his position looks increasingly precarious. And here's the irony. While these men amassed fortunes from drug deals, the Venezuelan people starved. As U.S. Attorney Ariana Fajardo put it,
"This party is coming to an end."
Her message was clear. The yachts, the private jets, the luxury condos in Miami, those days are numbered. Prosecutors in Florida have already seized over $450 million in illicit assets, and every seizure makes another Maduro insider think twice about where their loyalty lies. It gets darker. Court documents allege that Maduro himself personally authorized arrests of low-ranking soldiers, not because they were guilty, but because he needed scapegoats to cover up cocaine seizures tied to his cartel. Imagine the paranoia this breeds inside his own barracks. Any officer could be the next fall guy, and paranoia breeds betrayal. This is where the U.S. strategy becomes lethal. Military deployments grab headlines, but indictments and bounties rot regimes from the inside. By offering $15 million for Maduro and $10 million for his co-conspirators, Washington is dangling the ultimate temptation: betray your boss and walk away rich and free. It's the same playbook used against drug cartels for decades. Turn lieutenants against their kingpins. Only this time the kingpin isn't Escobar. It's a sitting president. But betrayal doesn't just come from generals. Venezuela's judiciary is rotten to its core. The Chief Justice himself, Miguel Moreno, was charged with money laundering, accused of dismissing cases and even approving the seizure of multinational corporations in exchange for bribes.
The charges against Chief Justice Moreno demonstrate that the last line of defense in Venezuela has crumbled, creating a system without rule of law and without justice.
With the courts compromised, Maduro doesn't just risk betrayal from soldiers, he risks betrayal from the very judges who once guaranteed his survival. So ask yourself, how long can Maduro hold on when his generals, his spies, his judges, and his ministers are all potential defectors? Trump's destroyers may have made headlines, but the real war is psychological. Every defection, every indictment, every frozen bank account chips away at Maduro's inner circle. Each day, the question grows louder: who will sell him out first? And if history is any guide, it won't be the starving Venezuelan people who topple Maduro. It'll be someone inside Miraflores Palace, a man with gold stars on his shoulders, a hidden account in Miami, and just enough fear to pick up the phone and call the DEA. The truth is, Maduro's regime has always lived in fear of betrayal. Even before U.S. indictments, there were whispers of coup plots inside Venezuela's military. In 2019, the world saw a dramatic attempt when Juan Guaido stood outside a Caracas airbase flanked by defecting soldiers, declaring Maduro's rule over. The uprising fizzled, but it proved one thing: cracks inside the armed forces were very real. And now, with billions frozen abroad and multi-million-dollar bounties on the table, those cracks are widening. Take General Vladimir Padrino Lopez, Venezuela's defense minister. He was supposed to be the iron shield protecting Maduro. Instead, U.S. prosecutors indicted him for conspiring to traffic cocaine, accusing him of turning Venezuelan airspace into a pay-to-play corridor for drug traffickers.
Padrino Lopez allegedly accepted bribes from drug trafficking organizations to allow them free passage to fly through Venezuelan airspace.
That indictment hit hard. If the man who controls the military's planes is accused of pocketing drug money, how much loyalty can Maduro really count on? And the whispers only grow louder. Former insiders claim that Maduro's intelligence services, staffed heavily with Cuban operatives, spend more time spying on their own officers than on foreign enemies. They know the danger isn't just Trump's destroyers offshore. The danger is a general in Caracas deciding the $15 million reward is worth more than his loyalty. It's a chilling parallel to Pablo Escobar's downfall. For years, Escobar ruled Medellin with fear and money, but once the United States and Colombian authorities began offering bounties, his inner circle fractured. Trusted lieutenants became informants, allies became enemies, and the once untouchable kingpin was gunned down on a rooftop. Maduro knows that story. He knows how it ends, and now he has to wonder if one of his own men is preparing to make him the next chapter. The betrayal isn't just military, it's financial. Miami prosecutors revealed that regime insiders have been laundering fortunes through Florida real estate. Luxury condos, yachts, high-end cars, bought not with hard work, but with bribes and drug money.
Whether it is million-dollar condos or yachts, very fancy yachts, and or jets that fly through the air, private jets. All of these belonging to whether it's Venezuelan generals or Venezuelan officials. All of this has become a part of our society in southern Florida.
But those assets are being seized. Over $450 million confiscated so far. And here's the genius of the U.S. strategy. Every yacht taken, every condo frozen, isn't just punishment, it's leverage. It forces Maduro's cronies to choose, cling to a sinking ship in Caracas, or cut a deal and save themselves. Even Venezuela's judiciary has been gutted by corruption. Judges accused of selling verdicts, dismissing cases for cash, and even greenlighting the seizure of multinationals like General Motors. Imagine the instability of a system where the highest court in the land has been caught auctioning justice, and now those same judges face indictments abroad. The so-called guardians of the revolution suddenly find themselves one indictment away from losing everything, which leads us to the most haunting question. How does a regime collapse? Not with a bang, not with a U.S. destroyer shelling Miraflores Palace, but with a whisper, a single defection, a single general who decides the reward is worth the risk, a single judge who hands over documents, a single insider who picks up the phone and calls the DEA. That's how Pablo Escobar fell. That's how Noriega fell. And that's how Nicolas Maduro may fall, not as a martyr in battle, but as a betrayed kingpin, sold out by the very men who once swore to protect him. So as Trump's destroyers patrol the Caribbean, as Marines wait on standby, the real countdown may already be happening inside Caracas, not on the battlefield, but in boardrooms, barracks, and back channels where Maduro's so-called allies are calculating their futures. And when that betrayal comes, and it will, don't expect warning shots. Expect silence, followed by a sudden collapse. Because in the end, the greatest threat to Nicolas Maduro isn't the United States. It's his own people, his generals, his judges, his cartel. The knives aren't coming from abroad. They're already inside the palace. That brings us to the end of this video. For more interesting videos like this, click on the cards on your screen.